So, Yvonne, I wanted to ask you about something that's very relevant for our conversation today, which is political reporters tend to like to group states into categories and regions. And I've seen a lot of people talking about the Sun Belt. Do people in Arizona actually call themselves residents of the Sun Belt, or is that something that just we do that?
I think you just do that. No one here in Arizona says that they're from a Sunbelt state. They say they're from southwestern United States, Arizona, great country of Arizona.
But like the Sun Belt sounds kind of cool. Like I want to live in the Sun Belt. That sounds lovely.
Sounds hot.
Welcome to the Campaign Moment from the Washington Post. I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. It's Tuesday, September 24th. And today I'm joined by Yvonne Winget-Sanchez, who reports on voting issues in Arizona for the Post. Hey, Yvonne.
Morning.
So today I wanted to talk about some long-awaited new polling that we got over the weekend in the presidential race in North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, which is, of course, where Yvonne is. Those states are very important to Donald Trump's path to victory in particular. And I also wanted to talk about the recent failed push by the Trump campaign to change how Nebraska awards its electoral votes, which could have had major implications on the presidential race. It didn't happen, but it signaled a desire to change the rules in order to win very late in the process. Yvonne, I'm so excited to talk to you because you know Arizona politics so well. You're based in that state and you've been covering it for a long time. And Arizona is a great window into a lot of the voting issues we're seeing in swing states this year. Can you just tell me what's the state of play on the ground where you are right now?
So, we don't know. We're all holding our breath. Presidential race definitely feels like it is just too close to really know who's going to win. There's really no clear winner. And I guess that's what it's like to live in a battleground state, right? We will all find out together. The other big race on the ballot, the race for U.S. Senate, this is the seat held by Kyrsten Sinema, who's not running for re-election. That one sort of feels like it could be a done deal, but it also could be too close to call. Whatever happens at the very top of the ticket with the presidential race seems like it's going to dictate what happens in the Senate race.
Yeah, and of course, that's a race featuring Republican Kari Lake and Congressman Ruben Gallego, the Democrat. Yvonne, I wanted to talk to you about your latest reporting in Arizona, which is not only a hugely important swing state, but also the scene of many interesting political stories. Can you just tell me about your story on Tuesday morning about the great lengths that Arizona is going to promote transparency in their vote counting process?
Sure. This is really taking people deep inside of the bowels of the election administration system and how election officials here in Arizona and elsewhere across the nation are trying to be just very radically transparent about how their operations work. This comes, 4 years almost after the last presidential election, where administrators in states like Arizona had protesters outside of their doors, had years of conspiracy theories about injected ballots, ballots that were falsely flown in from South Korea.
Yeah, the bamboo ballots, I think I remember hearing about.
Exactly.
Wasn't it bamboo?
Yep, bamboo ballots. We had all sorts of conspiracies tied to our drop boxes. So instead of keeping the system sort of away from the public and maybe a little bit mysterious, election officials are inviting people in. They are recording nearly every single step of the vote tallying process so that people can either watch for themselves or request the footage later. They're building new facilities. They're using GPS trackers to watch and monitor in real time ballots and voting equipment as they move. And so no one that I talk to thinks that this is going to stop the type of conspiracies that we've all become accustomed to and they've become accustomed to in this space. But in the space that we are living in now, they say it is worth a shot.
Yeah, I almost wonder about that because a lot of the conspiracy theories that we saw in the 2020 election stemmed from people signing affidavits who were witnessing the ballot counting process and swore that they'd seen something happening that was, illegal or, extensive fraud or, votes being miscounted. Is there a concern that opening this process up is going to open it up to people making those kinds of claims?
100%. And that was my biggest question is, aren't you giving fodder to further the conspiracies? And their response is, oh, yeah, 100%. But the conspiracies have come no matter what over the past 4 years. And we haven't tried this to the fullest extent.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking as I was reading this story about, especially in a state like Arizona that has proven to be a real hotbed of these kinds of voter fraud conspiracy theories. We have a Republican Party in Arizona that has often been controlled by the hard right. I just feel like it's going to be, yes, an interesting test case, but maybe the kind of state where that test case could potentially go very wrong. So Yvonne, not only are these questions about transparency and voter fraud so central in Arizona, but obviously it's important because this is a key swing state. We got a whole bunch of polls of the northern states after the debate 2 weeks ago, but we were really waiting on polls of Nevada, of North Carolina, of Georgia, and of course of Arizona. And we're starting to get some of those polls. The New York Times and Siena College put out polls of Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona on Monday. And in contrast to what we're seeing in the northern states, they're actually showing Donald Trump with small leads. Trump was 5 points ahead in Arizona, 4 points ahead in Georgia, and 2 points ahead in North Carolina. Yvonne, is that result surprising to you that Kamala Harris has not gained as much ground there and might still be trailing in this state?
It does. I mean, this race still very much feels like a knife fight. It feels kind of like how it felt in 2020. I mean, obviously, the campaigning is different. We're having tons of in-person events, but everywhere I go, no matter who I talk to, there's a lot of pessimism about the future of this country and who might be best positioned to lead it. Obviously, issues of the economy, issues of illegal immigration and border security, issues of, public safety and opportunity, affordable housing. People aren't really feeling great about where this country is. And there's so much chaos. People seem to feel like there's just so much chaos around them. And I think that partly accounts for that big gap that we're seeing. I do think that gap is going to, narrow, obviously, as the election comes closer. 5 points feels a little too high for me. I do feel like it will be very close.
Yeah, I feel like, obviously this is one poll. The New York Times Siena College polling has tended to be better for Donald Trump than other polls. We're going to have to see if we get other surveys that echo this and suggest that, the southern swing states are tougher for Harris than the northern ones for some reason. The other thing to note about this Times poll is that the last one that it did actually showed Harris ahead by 5 points in Arizona. So this would be a very huge shift. But even if it's close, I think it's important to note we saw this split in the polls before Harris got in the race. There was a sense when Biden was in the race, and a lot of the people who were arguing that he still had a shot to win, they pointed to how well he was doing in those northern swing states, even as he wasn't doing as well in the southern ones. And they argued that he had a path to victory as long as he was able to hold on to those northern states. Those northern ones, of course, are Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So in some ways, this poll, even if it's, not strictly accurate, and not every poll is strictly accurate, could kind of be echoing where the race was with Biden. Maybe we have some kind of a divide in this country where these more southern swing states, the southwestern swing states, are just harder for Democrats to win than they were in 2020. And also, I think it's important to note that Arizona and Georgia were red states before the 2020 election. Those were the big flips that Biden got. And so this could be somewhat of a reversion to the political mean, like maybe the voters in there still are kind of right-leaning and more so than other swing states. I also think it's important to revisit our polling averages here at the Washington Post, which we've been tracking the quality polls in these states. And right now, Harris does lead by more in those northern states. She's either 2 points up or 3 points up in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. We have Arizona and Georgia favoring Trump. North Carolina and Nevada are much closer. So a very, very competitive race. Yvonne, I also wanted to ask you, one of the things that I've been struck by, even if we're assuming that these polls might be off a little bit, I wonder, what do you think the polling that we're seeing right now in these southern swing states says about Harris's and Trump's path to victories? Do you see there being kind of this southern versus northern split that people are talking about a lot?
I do. I do think that one constituency that we have to really keep an eye on, though, are these younger minority men. And this is a constituency that Republicans, since Donald Trump's rise back in, 2015, 2016, have really been speaking to and really been paying attention to and catering to in a way that we haven't really seen Democrats do. And in places like Arizona, you have a pretty good ground game by groups affiliated or aligned with Donald Trump out there every single day talking to these people who might have felt forgotten in the process, in the political process, but they know that their grocery bills are higher. They can't take their kids on vacations. They can't afford it. It might be, just a little bit too expensive. They are watching Spanish language media, English language media, and everywhere they look, there are these really, really dark ads about Kamala Harris and Ruben Gallego, the Democratic Senate candidate, and blaming them for the economy, blaming them for border security, blaming them for the deaths of American citizens or crime, blaming them for, why the lives of Americans are not as good as they could be. And I think it is really easy to overlook sort of that darkness and the dark theme and the effect of speaking to people like this, but it is having an effect. And I think we're seeing some movement, as we've been seeing over the past decade or so, of these younger minority voters moving towards Republicans, moving towards Donald Trump. Those people are key to Republican successes. So I would start with that. And the other thing that I would say is, Arizona is still a red state. Mm-hmm. We happen to be purple right now because of a number of different factors, partly because of, Republican quality candidates over the last couple of cycles. Democrats have won not because they're just so great in places like Arizona. They've won because the Republican candidates have not been as good as they could be.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I always think about, everybody talks about Republican Senate candidate Kari Lake, who is the gubernatorial candidate in 2022, and they talk about what a bad candidate she was. She's kind of lumped in with these other candidates who underperformed where you'd expect Republicans to be. Kari Lake almost won the governor's race in 2022. So it does speak to how Arizona is still kind of a red-leaning state, and I think we're kind of seeing that with the voter registration in the state, which I'm not sure if you've been tracking, but it's drifted further towards Republicans in recent years, which I think is something that might surprise people a little bit. Something that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting was, the people being served up these messages about the border. And obviously the border is an issue everywhere in the country in this election because we saw record numbers of border crossings in recent years. Do you get a sense, though, that it is a bigger issue in Arizona, or is that an oversimplification? Do we just assume that because it's a border state, it's a bigger issue there?
No, it is a bigger issue, especially for these smaller communities along the border who have dealt with huge numbers of asylum seekers, of immigrants, and there's just like not enough transportation, there's not enough shelter. These communities don't have the resources that they need to get these people out of their towns. And so that is like baked in the cake, right? Here in Arizona, like we know what it means to have a border that is not fully secured and or to have a rush or large numbers of immigrants coming into the United States, whatever the status might be. I think that Republicans, especially this cycle, have been super effective at highlighting the notion that Kamala Harris has been in office for almost 4 years. Why hasn't she done anything about it? And I do think that that's an effective message, especially for people who are already skeptical of government institutions, of this whole political process, of the chaos, and just want to go about their daily lives and really not have to think about it.
We're going to take a quick break there, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about a very related issue to the election administration theme that we're talking about here, which is a failed push by the Trump campaign that would have given the Republican candidate an edge in the 2024 election. We'll be right back. So now let's talk a little bit about what's been happening in another subtly important state, which is Nebraska. Not really a swing state, but it is important in the presidential race. And this has to do with the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College is, of course, how presidents are elected in the United States. It is not a popular vote. And in most states, if one candidate gets 51% of the vote, they get all of the Electoral College votes. It's winner take all, and you need 270 electoral votes to win. But Nebraska is one of two states that gives the winner of each congressional district a single electoral vote. The other one is Maine. And that's important because one of those districts in Nebraska, which is based in Omaha, is pretty competitive and actually pretty friendly to Democrats. Joe Biden won that district in 2020 and carried its electoral vote. So he has one little so-called blue dot in the state of Nebraska, which is otherwise very red. So the reason I bring this up is that last week, Trump and his allies renewed a previous push to change how the state awards its electoral votes. They pushed for it to be a winner-take-all system. What this would effectively do is likely give Trump an additional electoral vote. But a state senator named Mike McDonnell, a former Democrat who represents Omaha, came out against it on Monday and said that the change shouldn't be made this close to the election. He also said that they should put it on the ballot for voters to decide. And then on Tuesday, Republican Governor Jim Pillen of Nebraska said that, yeah, McDonnell's dissent means that this is basically a dead issue, that they won't attempt to change it before the election. So it's fizzled out for now. But I'm kind of fascinated by this story, Yvonne, because I don't know how much you've been following it, but like this idea that there is going to be this change that's made so late in the process with a single electoral vote at stake, what are your thoughts on what this says about where our politics are at right now?
It says it is going to be a knife fight, I think. And I think it shows how close this race really could be. And it shows how one candidate in particular, is seeking to use his influence, his power, to try to ensure that should this thing come down to a razor-thin margin yet again, that the levers of the election process, the election system, could be, to use a familiar word, rigged or changed to benefit a certain candidate. And this plays into this broader fight over the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of the country's election system, which is different from state to state, different from county to county. And it shows just how cued in everyone is on these different rules and how they could ultimately affect the fight to 270 electoral votes.
The presidential race has been decided by about a point in the decisive states over the last two presidential elections. The Electoral College has been a wider margin in both of those races, but there is a very specific case in which that single electoral vote could matter. And it's actually the one we've been talking about here, where Donald Trump sweeps these southern swing states, these southwestern, southern Sunbelt swing states, and Harris sweeps the northern ones of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Under the current rules, with Nebraska splitting up its electoral votes, winning those three northern states would get Harris to 270 electoral votes. If Nebraska were to change how it awards electoral votes, it would lead to a 269 to 269 tie. And so the Trump campaign has been pushing for this for a while because that scenario has been real for a while. I mean, I was writing about this several months ago, back when Biden was still in the race, and it looked like that was his path to victory. And so the idea that the Trump campaign would push for this isn't just like, oh, it's an electoral vote, every little bit counts. There is actually a very specific scenario in which this matters. Yvonne, I wonder if you can think of comparable cases of a campaign trying to kind of game the system so late in the process. Like, are there other examples of people like obviously trying to give themselves a little bit of a leg up with a late change to the process in our elections?
Well, I can think of one state in particular in the Sunbelt states, Georgia. Amy Gardner, our
See, I thought you were going
has-
with Arizona on this, but you went for Georgia.
I was going to go for Georgia.
Okay.
I feel like, I beat up on my home state here quite a bit. Georgia has had a last minute change. One of its election boards passed a rule. It is brand new. It is late in the game. That's caused a whole lot of controversy, likely litigation. And this rule would require that election officials conduct these hand counts alongside the counting of ballots by machine. And these hand counts would have to be done the night of the election or in the days following. And this is something that election skeptics have been pushing for the last 4 years. But it's also something that is like deeply inaccurate and prone for all kinds of errors, all kinds of confusion. And the Republican Attorney General there has said, like, look, this is illegal. We can't do this.
It's Chris Carr, the Attorney General of Georgia, right?
Yep. And he has said this is going to lead to all kinds of chaos and uncertainty. And so I would expect litigation on that rule, given what Amy has reported. But this is something that we're going to continue to see more of. I think a last minute push to change rules, including rules around the hand counts. And there is deep concern that the changing of the rules, in a sense, adding to the rules, adding to the process, is going to give more fodder to deniers and is going to, maybe unintentionally, really continue to sow even more doubt in a system that is already under assault.
Yeah, I think on Nebraska, it's important to note that, this is kind of how my mind works, is that this is a change that could have potentially changed the results of a presidential election. It may have been decided by one vote in the state legislature. And that just kind of gets at how important the individual state legislature elections can be. Like, these state legislative elections, which people probably don't pay nearly as much attention to, can ultimately have very large kind of butterfly effects on our American politics. And that's something that people shouldn't lose sight of.
Can I just say on that point, if Rusty Bowers had not been the Speaker of the House in Arizona in 2020, had it been the guy who ended up replacing him, an election denier, what would have happened?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great example. We had Rusty Bowers was, of course, a key figure in the January 6th committee hearings, which people might have seen. He was kind of holding the line against these election deniers. We saw a number of officials in Georgia, for instance, standing up to election deniers in their midst. Like, you put one or two people in a different position and allow the decision to be made by them, and we can have very different results of these processes.
100%.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for chatting with me, Yvonne.
Thanks so much.
Yvonne Winjet Sanchez covers voting issues in Arizona for The Post. There's going to be a lot more polls and a lot more analysis that you won't want to miss over the next 6 weeks. And you'll be able to read it all by subscribing to my newsletter, also called The Campaign Moment. You can find a link to that newsletter in our show notes and at postreports.com. And if you don't already, make sure that you're subscribing to the Campaign Moment podcast. Find us wherever you're listening. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Rennie Svirnovskiy. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy. I'm Aaron Blake. See you later this week. Yeah, Yvonne, have you ever seen an actual knife fight?
I have not seen a knife fight, but I kind of feel like it's like a paring knife. Like, it's kind of brutal. Like, short.
A paring knife.
Yeah, totally.
The 2024 election is a paring knife fight.